cash to spend however you like. You'll also receive the very latest iPhone 16 and we'll send you on a shopping spree with £500 to spend in your favourite store. For another chance to win, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. Call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge, or post your name and number to GB11 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 7th of March. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Mornings don't have to be tiresome, especially if you have the right company.
Wake up to news as it happens, opinion and debate, and of course, a little bit of entertainment too.
Because when the kettle's on, we're on.
That's Breakfast on GB News, a show worth waking up for.
Every morning from 6 a.m.
Only on the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We'll spread the news, you spread the word. Good evening. Well, the Prime Minister announces a 0.2% increase in defence spending, but is it enough ahead of the big meeting he's going to have with Donald Trump in the Oval Office on Thursday? One of the senior figures in Ofgem has explained the increase in the energy price cap, saying that it's the result of high natural gas prices. I will show you why that is completely and utterly untrue. We'll talk about an event I went to last night that was ambushed by Antifa, violent protest, including somebody having a tooth knocked out. We'll ask, what is reasonable when it comes to political protest? And the National Farmers Union had a conference today, and I've got to tell you, they're not exactly happy with the Environment Secretary. All of that in a packed programme, but first, let's get the news with Sophia Wensler.
Nigel, thank you. Good evening. These are your headlines at 7 o'clock. Sir Keir Starmer has blamed a dangerous new era for his decision to increase defence spending and cut foreign aid. Earlier today, the Prime Minister announced a major plan to increase defence spending to 2.5% by 2027, calling it the biggest sustained increase since the Cold War. But to fund it, the aid budget will be slashed from 0.5% to 0.3% of national income, sparking backlash from charities who warn of devastating consequences. Addressing the nation today from Downing Street, Sir Keir Starmer said the defence and national security of Britain must come first.
Are ready to meet the challenges of our volatile world. The reason for this is straightforward. Putin's aggression does not stop in Ukraine. We will fund the initial increase in defence spending by cutting our spending on overseas development, moving from 0.5% of GNI to 0.3%. I want to be clear, that is not an announcement that I'm happy to make. However, the realities of our dangerous new era mean that the defence and national security of our country must always come first.
Now, energy bills are set to rise again, with Ofgem confirming a higher-than-expected increase of more than £100 a year from April. The 6.4% hike will push annual bills for a typical household to £1,849, affecting 22 million homes across England, Scotland and Wales. The regulator says rising wholesale costs are to blame and suggests customers consider fixing tariffs, but prices could fall again in July. Standing charges are also going up for gas, and consumer groups warn the increase will hit struggling families the hardest. In other news, the BBC has issued a public apology after a review revealed missed opportunities to address concerns over former Radio 1 DJ Tim Westwood's conduct. While the report found no widespread knowledge of serious allegations, the broadcaster admits it fell short of its values, apologising to those affected and promising changes to prevent future failures. Westwood, who strongly denies all allegations, was accused of creating a toxic work environment during his time at the BBC. The £3.3 million review also outlines steps the BBC has already taken to tackle bullying and harassment. And the Vatican says the Pope is in a critical but stable condition for the fourth day running. The 88-year-old has been at Rome's Gemelli Hospital since the 14th of February and is being treated for double pneumonia and chronic bronchitis. The Pope's prognosis, it says, remains guarded. Those are the latest GB News headlines. Now it's back to Nigel.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Good evening. Well, it's not a great surprise, but the Prime Minister told the House of Commons today, as you've just seen on the news, that defence spending is to increase from 2.3% of GDP to 2.5% of GDP. Perhaps we didn't expect him to say that that would come out of the foreign aid budget. But I just wonder, looking at the big picture, is that really enough of an increase in defence spending? And I mean that really in two ways. One, in terms of what our capabilities need to be. But secondly, he is going into the Oval Office to meet Donald Trump on Thursday. Trump, all through his first term, in the intervening years and now, is saying Europe really must, and Britain, really must spend a lot more money in defence. Is a 0.2% increase going to impress the American president? We will see. Is this enough? You tell me what you think. Tweet #Farage on GB News or email farage@gbnews.com. I'm joined by panel regular Joe Phillips, journalist and former spin doctor, and I'm also joined by Emma Trimble, writer and broadcaster. Joe, we kind of thought this is what the increase would be. We didn't know that foreign aid would be cut. But given how robust Trump has been, and quite right too, you know, I think when he first came into power in 2017, I think only 5 of the then 28 NATO members were even paying 2%. That did go up in the intervening years, but is this enough to impress the American president?
Well, I don't know. I think, you know, it's important to say that Trump wasn't the first American president to say it. I mean, it goes back to JFK in the 1960s. Obama said it. Various other American presidents have made the point that Europe needs to contribute a lot more. I mean, I think it is significant in terms of Keir Starmer saying something concrete, because at the weekend, the ministers that were doing the broadcasting rounds were unable to say when this might happen.
They were very vague,
so that is something. It is a move in the right direction, and it does mean that he can go to Washington for the meeting on Thursday saying, look, we've done this. You know, there are going to be an awful lot of people who think cutting the aid budget to pay for defence is a travesty and will be deeply disappointed.
And others that think it's a good idea.
And others that think it's a good idea. But I think the most important thing is that this is something where it's not an awful lot of money, given the challenges that we face, but it is important to work out how it is best spent.
Yeah, and he is saying we'll go up, you know, into the next parliament, 3%.
Exactly, but I mean, it is still less.
But it's something.
It's something, and it's. I think it's an indication, it's an expression of, we hear you, Mr. President. Yeah, we've now set a date.
Emma, move in the right direction?
It is a move in the right direction because, you know, anything from where we are, unless it's, you know, reducing spending, would be a move in the right direction. And the concern is that, you know, even though it might be a gesture to Donald Trump of good faith, that actually it's not enough and it's not fast enough. I mean, I think Poland is the only country who's even nearing 5% of GDP, which is really ideally where we would be at. Senior figures...
Yeah, I mean 5%'s a bit... I mean, you know, throughout most of the Cold War, we spent about 4.5%. But Trump...
Still, I mean, 3% is not really that significant in terms of, you know, percentage of GDP.
So where would you cut?
I like the idea of taking the money from foreign aid. I think that's it makes sense. I mean, we're giving all sorts of payouts to various countries that we shouldn't be, countries like India or China, where it really doesn't make sense for us. And it's an obvious place for us to be targeting, some of the
You sound like we need a British Doge.
Oh, well, I can't say I disagree with that. Maybe Musk can come over and lend us some advice. I think there are a lot of areas where the state could be saving money that it is spending on some of the most absurd things. I mean, Charlotte Gill here in the UK, journalist, has been doing excellent work showing just how much money is being spent on absurd things that taxpayers would be very, very angry about if they found out. So, look, I think given the threats we face geopolitically, we need to be increasing our defence spending. Senior figures in the army have been saying for a very long time that this is urgent. It's not, never mind the recruitment crisis and all of these other aspects that affect our security. So, yes, it's a move in the right direction, but I don't think it's enough.
No, and I've spoken. I was in America last week for a few days. I've spoken to retired generals, admirals, who say, when it comes to our relationship and working together, we love the British Special Forces. We've always had a great rapport with them, and they matter to us. But kind of your conventional forces now are so small, you're not really a serious player.
Well, and I think that is probably true. But I think, up until the invasion of Ukraine, nobody was particularly thinking about conventional warfare. Who would have thought that we would have seen tanks and trenches on, mainland Europe at this time? But I think there are some really significant issues, and this is where I think it needs to be focused. And I would hope that Keir Starmer does this as a united, cross-party thing, because it's very serious. So it's things like the security of the cables under the sea, and we don't know where the Russian submarines are. It's about drones, it's about cyber security, it's all of those.
It's much broader than it ever was before.
Absolutely.
Now, of course, the Prime Minister's thinking very hard about this meeting with Donald Trump, but he also seems to have me very much inside his brain. In fact, I said to him the answer or the cause of nearly all of his problems. Earlier on today, our own GBNews' own political editor, Chris Hope, pointed out to the Prime Minister that the increases in defence spending and the timelines on to 3% in 2030 and the cuts in foreign aid, he pointed out, helpfully to the Prime Minister, that all of this was in Reform's contract with the people last June. Here was the PM's somewhat testy response.
Prime Minister Chris Hope from GB News. In July, Reform UK fought the election on a policy to increase defence spending to 2.5% of GDP by 2027 and 3% of GDP after 2030, funded by a £6 billion saving in the aid budget. Are you Nigel Farage in disguise?
Nigel Farage didn't even turn up to the debate in Parliament today. Nigel Farage is fawning over Putin. That's not patriotism. That is not what working people need.
Gosh, he does seem to be terribly upset. And this line, that I'm fawning over Putin, was a complete and utter tosh at every level. But he's just going to keep putting this out again and again. It was funny. I mean, Chris Hope is very good at asking those really awkward questions. I'm not sure the PM knows what his real priorities are. It was an odd answer.
It was an odd answer, and it was an odd answer to be riled by it, actually, because,
And he was riled.
It's not very clever, and I think, the last thing we need is, people chucking insults at each other. But, it is a fair point that you weren't there for this very significant meeting. He could have said, yes, we all agree across party that, the Lib Dems have backed it. Even Kemi Badenoch backed it and then went off on some tangent about something else that she's cross about. There are ways of dealing with it. And I think one of the things is to not get riled. Don't let people get...
Yes, whether I'd been there or not, I was actually meeting industry figures who were very concerned about what happens after April the 1st. Goodness knows what the job losses are going to... genuinely going to be... Everything from the care sector right the way through hospitality, you name it. But he did get upset, didn't he?
He really
didn't like it. He's really scared of me, isn't he?
Given how well Reform are doing in the polls, he should have actually responded the opposite way. He should be, Chris, stop, you flatterer. Because, the idea that this is going to sit well with an electorate who are obviously very unhappy. He's talking about defence spending when the public are well aware that the army couldn't even fill Wembley Stadium. And he's talking about you flattering Putin. I mean, the whole thing seems quite childish, actually. And it seems to be an accusation that is constantly being levelled at Reform's MPs, that they're not there in the chamber.
Which is not
when
true.
They're tweeting from the chamber while I'm sitting here right now.
No, the other 4 are really active in the chamber.
I saw somebody from the Express, journalist from, I think it's the Express, tweeted out a table that showed the top 10 most vocal MPs in Parliament, and 2 of them were Reform, which, given the number of MPs, is extremely disproportionate.
Yeah, no, I mean...
so it's an absurd accusation, it's blatantly false.
Well, Joe, you work for Paddy Ashdown, and I'm not allowed in the Palace of Westminster to do any party business at all.
No, I know.
I'm there to represent the constituents of Claxon, and that's fine. That's what representative democracy is. But I'm not allowed to do party business. So, and I sort of say, well, what time are votes today? Or sometime between 4 and 7. The whole thing needs a bit of modernisation.
Well, it is very difficult to...
Paddy must have found this.
Yeah, to run a party. Well, we had offices in Cowley Street in those days.
Yeah.
But, you have to physically leave the palace of Westminster to go and do stuff like that, or hope that nobody notices if it's quick. But I think there are times when, and people will say, Nigel, you should have been there, you should have said to, it's like votes. We know that all the way around here, around Westminster, the restaurants, such as they are left. No, but they used to have the division bell so that people could, in the middle of their food, could just nip back and... But, the way Parliament works needs a lot of reform, and it isn't that difficult to make it possible.
But he does, you've watched and commentated and been involved for quite a long time.
Steady.
Well, I'm just trying to be diplomatic about that. But and so have I, in a way. Emma far less so. But a Prime Minister, only 8 months in to his premiership, not looking happy, is he?
I think this is going to be a very defining week for him.
With Trump? With
Trump. And I think that, he was criticised at the beginning of his leadership for being abroad a lot. Actually, I think, you can't win. You're always going... You win and you lose on that because some people think he ought to be here. Yeah. I think it's a very important meeting in the Oval Office with Trump, and I think there's a lot weighing on him because he is, in a way, because we are not part of the EU, but he's got good relationships with European leaders, and he appears to have a relatively cordial relationship with Trump.
So far,
with the phone calls and whatnot. But he's made it very clear that, Britain will back Ukraine, will back Zelensky. And I think there's that. But also, he will know that that money is going to, it's another great big expense.
One thing for certain is if Ukraine don't get proper security guarantees, then the whole peace deal won't be worth anything because he could do it again. Massive moment for Starmer, as Joe says. You've got potential tariffs coming in on the 2nd of April. You've got the whole future of NATO, defence, disagreements to some extent over Ukraine, although I sense in the last 24 hours, even Trump's now talking about forces being there, etc. How should Starmer approach Trump, do you think?
Well, I think Starmer's had it easy so far, and it's quite remarkable considering, how unpopular and how quickly they have become unpopular. I think it's probably historical for a government to become so unpopular so fast. And now he actually faces some really quite significant, difficult hurdles that would be, difficult for a high-quality statesman, not to insult him. But I think I think the main thing that he needs to do is that he needs to enter into this honestly, because Donald Trump is being constantly misrepresented in his approach to Ukraine, I think. The idea, for example, that, he doesn't care about the security of Ukraine when he's been telling European countries to increase their defence spending precisely because he believes that they should, carry their own weight. He obviously cares about the defence of Europe. The same with J.D. Vance. A lot of people criticised him for his speech at the Munich Security Conference, but he was constantly speaking in terms of our electorate, our security. It was clear that they are presenting themselves to Europe and to Britain as a critical friend. And so I think the most important thing, if Keir Starmer is going to get anything meaningful out of this is to go into these conversations with the same honest attitude.
It's going to be fascinating, and like you, Emma, I will not insult the Prime Minister in any way at all. I'll let him go on insulting me. I'm rather enjoying it. Now, in a moment, the energy price cap has gone up, and yet the excuses being given by the regulator Ofgem and indeed the Energy Secretary Ed Miliband simply aren't true. I'll tell you why in just a moment.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
Well, specialist from Woolley & Wallace Auction House, Alexandra Aguilar, joins me now. Alexandra, how lovely to see you. And I wonder whether you were going to bring the jewellery in. You're actually wearing the jewellery. So shall we begin with the bracelet?
Right, so it's a diamond line bracelet, as you can see. It's really a beautiful thing. It's made of 27 diamonds with a yellow tint, and they are mounted on yellow gold, and it's really a beautiful, beautiful piece. But there's more to it, and as you mentioned, it's the provenance. It comes from the collection of Elizabeth Taylor, really one of the queens of Hollywood, and it was given to her by Michael Jackson.
Have you any idea why Michael Jackson gave her such a magnificent gift?
They were very, very good friends. They were friends for over 20 years, and he knew her love for diamonds, for jewelry, and we know that they exchanged many presents, including this fantastic bracelet.
Would that have been made new at that time?
Yes, I believe so.
We're talking, what, about the 1970s or something like that?
Oh, maybe a little bit later.
Later, 80s?
Yes, that's right. But what's particularly interesting about this one is all the 27 diamonds have the same colour. And it's very difficult to find stones with the same colour, with the same yellow tint. So it makes it particularly beautiful and particularly special. Why do you think it will go for about £70,000? It's... well, it is a beautiful piece. It's very wearable, as you can see, and there is the provenance is amazing. Jewelry from the collection of Elizabeth Taylor is very sought after, of course.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Headliners on GB News 11 p.m. every night. It's got 3 top comedians going through the next day's newspapers so you don't have to read them, which is great.
That's a good point. He's lying. I mean, maybe he's not lying.
That's Headliners every night from 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. as well on GB News, Britain's news channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
The announcement, no surprise to me, that by April, energy prices are going up yet again. Yes, energy prices. You remember the government, with this massive majority, promised us they would cut our energy bills by £300 per household. But actually, by April, energy prices on average will have increased by just over 18%. Question is, why? Well, earlier on this morning, we had Tim Jarvis, who is the Director General of Markets at Ofgem, the regulator, and he was on Radio 4's Today programme. Here is how he explained the increase in energy bills.
The challenge we've got here is that the prices are being driven by the international price of gas, and we are seeing that price go up significantly in the early months of this year, and that is leading to the increase that we've announced today. Really, the main determinant of what happens with those gas prices are things that are unfortunately outside our control because they are driven by international factors.
So this guy's being paid out of public money, and he told you it's the increase in gas prices in the early months of this year that's led to the rise. He is not telling the truth. Either that or he's just pig ignorant, because if we have a look at the graph, we will see that gas prices have so far, since January the 1st, fallen like a stone. They are, as we went on air, 16.5% lower than they were on the 1st of January. Well, clearly he's in cahoots with the Energy Secretary, Ed Miliband, because here's what he had to say.
This will be very worrying news for many families, and it's driven by the rise in global gas prices. But this government is determined to act, and we're acting to bring down bills for everyone with our mission for clean, homegrown power that we control.
Well, the guy's a complete fantasist. And look, they both stuck to the line. Truth of it is, they do not want to admit to you just how much their net zero policies, just how much the subsidy of all forms of renewables are really costing you, let alone the cost to British industry. I'm joined in the studio by Angela Knight, former chief executive and of UK Energy. Angela, this really makes me angry.
I'm not surprised.
Because it's just not true.
I heard it this morning as well.
You did.
And you do get gas prices. They do spike and go up, and there's a trend. And as you rightly point out, the trend is now going down, and the odd spike has taken place when we've had a cold bit in Europe.
Yeah.
And, of course, they live off storage because most of the European countries are not connected to the North Sea, and they did used to rely on Russia.
And we have had, through December, January, even into February, some remarkably calm spells.
Absolutely.
When wind energy has been producing 1-2% of our needs.
Oh, it's been actually quite interesting. I have some... I can be sort of really boring. I have this graph which I can update all the time on my iPad.
Is that what you do?
And it... I do other things, but I do that as well. Yeah. And it tells me at any one point how much of we're using, how much power we're using that's been made from traditional generation, how much is from wind, how much is solar, how much we're importing, what's coming from nuclear. And the worrying thing about it, if anybody wants to look at this app, is, first of all, how much we do really still need our gas-fired power stations. Yeah. So, for heaven's sake, will people stop saying
most of which are going,
the devil?
Most of which, by 2030, will be obsolete.
I know. Secondly, that, of course, we are still getting a bit from our nuclear, but we haven't built any new nuclear. And what we have chosen to spend our money on is those huge, great things which cost about £30 billion, take about 20 years to build, and not the small-scale nuclear reactors which are repetitive in their design. They can be put together quickly and they don't have to be built off a governor's balance.
And that's what they call base load power, isn't it?
And that is what you need.
Because you know 24/7, 365 days a year what you're going to get.
So if you've got a really windy day and a really sunny day and we're all sitting at home in our sweaters instead of putting the heating on, then you can have some days where wind will do it and solar will do it. But for heaven's sake, very few.
Seems to me, Angela, that the more wind turbines we build and the more solar panels go on beautiful farmland...
The more backup we need.
The more backup and the more expensive our bills become.
And what we don't do is build the backup at the moment. We're relying on importing it from continental Europe, and that's expensive as well.
So I think Norway we import a lot of electricity from, but equally from France as well.
Yeah, yes, we've got half a dozen interconnectors. But don't forget, you have these periods where it's very still and very cold across Europe. Well, nobody's got much in the way of surplus power. And then we go and distort the price of our power by distorting the wholesale price, the pool price, if you like, upwards. So whatever was the last generator required to provide the amount of electricity that is the demand in the country, on an every half-hour basis, the price of the pool is set by the last generator required, which is the most expensive. So that is one of the reasons why industry is tearing its hair out and why we're charging industry, who they're the big electricity consumers, twice, maybe 3 times what is the case in other countries.
Or even 4 or 5 times, or 5 times
in
America.
The US.
Yeah.
And then on gas, we're making ourselves more and more dependent on imports, because one of the many stupid things that Ed Miliband has said is that, we're not going to take any more out of the North Sea. So apparently it's all right to ship it in from Qatar, but not taking out from your North Sea.
It's almost unbelievable. Something Angela said there I thought really resonated that the more we rely on renewables, the more backup we need.
Yeah.
This never gets discussed, does it?
No, and to be fair, the last government, 14 years they didn't do anything about any storage facilities, and you mentioned the storage facilities.
Yeah, they reduced them, didn't they?
Yeah, but let me say, there is one thing about storage facilities which get forgotten. Of course you need them in Germany. Yeah. You're not connected to the North Sea. At least we've got 50% in the North Sea. No, that is... But you are correct.
Yes, but there was nothing.
Storage.
There was no storage,
right.
And also
well, there is. It's called rough, but not enough is your point.
Not enough.
I agree. I'm not arguing.
And the upfront costs of renewable energy are huge to start with, but they should become cheaper. And if you can upgrade...
I keep hearing this.
Well, they should.
I keep hearing this.
They can't.
Why?
The reason why it can't become cheaper is because any which way you look at the situation now, we've got to do big capital expenditure, whether it's in small nuclear rather than wind, or whether it's in wind farms or whatever. We haven't got enough power. We've got to do that investment. And what we've also got to do is shift the grid, because our national grid went straight down the country, because that's where our power stations are now. And that's 20, 30 billion. Yeah. And even if you build a small scale, it's 2 billion a go. Well, you can't get people to invest for free. You know, we've got to pay them back. So evidently the price will go up.
It is about neglect, isn't it, Angela? It's about neglect of updating the grid.
I think it's a mixture. I think it's a mixture of yes, partly neglect, but partly because across the deciding classes, which is, politicians, civil servants or whatever, they never worked it out. They're not engineers. They haven't thought about it as the whole. They thought about it as piece by piece.
Hasn't this become, Emma, almost like a religion?
Oh, it is.
You know, the last Conservative government, or Theresa May in particular, before that, pushed through net zero targets without even a vote in the House of Commons. Miliband is now the high priest for all of this. The BBC push it all. Every time there's a wind farm, a new wind farm in the Bristol Channel that'll power Bristol for the next 48 years. There's been no. I mean, we're having it tonight. There's been no proper debate.
You read my mind. Everything's being sacrificed on the altar of net zero. Reform's very own Richard Tice pointed out that the actual reason why people's bills are rising is because of the subsidies for these renewables. And as you pointed out, I mean, the great irony of this, of course, is that when the wind doesn't blow, the turbines don't produce any energy, and then we have to run down our other reserves, and then therefore the price of gas goes up. It's a nonsense way of going about things.
Final thought, Angela, on this. This was the cost of living is right up there in the top two or three issues, and as GDP per capita has been falling consistently over the last 2 years, we've had, pensioners losing their energy entitlements, and yet this government seems hell-bent on continuing with the same policy.
I know. Well, I personally think that at some point they have to put the brake on, because it must be dawning across the cabinet that this is a hugely expensive programme, far more complicated than they thought it was. And the fact that most of them are sitting there with PPE degrees or whatever it may be, they need the engineers, they need to think it through. I know I shouldn't badmouth PPE. I do beg your pardon. You probably
No, I agree with you. I agree with you.
Because nobody has ever said who pays how much and for what. And unless you have a sensible programme of change, and that is what energy is, that is understood, that is affordable, done at a pace in which you can actually do it, the public will lose complete faith with it. So they either go for a sensible rejuvenation, development programme in which we do have energy security on that timetable, where we've got people to actually do it. We don't have enough engineers anyway. Unless they do that, it's going to be money that will be spent, and we will end up with just decaying infrastructure again, and we won't have the sort of reasonable security and reasonable cost power that we need in this country.
This issue is going to get bigger and bigger, I
think
feel.
So.
Angela, thank you very much indeed for coming on and sharing with us your knowledge and experience of the industry. In a moment, let's talk about political protest. What is and what is not acceptable?
Can't wait to get in that sea.
Lovely and warm.
Just like the feeling of having great travel insurance.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
If you're heading away for some winter sun through this week, there will be some fine weather around across parts of the Mediterranean, but currently around the eastern Med it's still fairly unsettled. Some heavy rain, some strong winds and temperatures well below average for the time of year, but these are gradually going to be lifting. Further west, a drier story across many parts of, well, France and Spain, but there is some wet weather starting to push its way in as we go later on this week. Otherwise, some decent sunshine on offer. See you later.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial. And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born. It's everything you need to kickstart your evening. Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it. That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, you didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more. Whether it's breaking royal news, Will, please bring us up to date, or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons.
Very, very curious.
We bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, and as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/your-say. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Mornings don't have to be tiresome, especially if you have the right company.
Wake up to news as it happens, opinion and debate, and of course, a little bit of entertainment too.
Because when the kettle's on, we're on.
That's Breakfast on GB News, a show worth waking up for.
Every morning from 6 a.m.
Only on the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We'll spread the news, you spread the word. Well, J.D. Vance warned us the other week about freedom of speech. By that he meant censorship. But there's another thing that happened last night that makes me worry about freedom of speech and about the whole democratic process. It was an event that I was doing in Camborne in Cornwall last night, where a group called Antifa turned up. Now, they have their origins in America, and they're more than happy to resort to violence. Have a quick look at some of the Antifa protesters from last night.
the fascists! Who protects the fascists? Shame on you! Shame on you! Wait. Embarrassed! Shame on you!
So let's be clear, these were masked protesters. Members of the public were expected to walk through them. Of course, what they were looking for was members of the public to react. One member of the public who was there had his tooth knocked out, but no arrests were made. And no attempt was made by Devon and Cornwall police to separate protesters out. And prior to the event, they've made scores of phone calls to the venue saying, cancel the event or there will be violence on your premises. And I've got to tell you something. I'm a great believer in political protest. You can stand there and shout, maybe chuck the odd egg. All right? Just about live with that. I think what happened last night was closer to political terrorism and quite extraordinary that Zoe Fox, Councillor Zoe Fox, was there, and she was the Labour mayor of Cambourne up until last year. I have written to the Home Secretary, and I will be actually writing to the Chief Constable of Devon and Cornwall Police complaining about their conduct. You've seen loads of political protests over the years. I just don't think people with masks should be able to crowd round the entrance.
No.
At what is a democratic event?
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, actually, you couldn't see it very well on that clip, but the clip I looked at earlier where they were masked, they looked very intimidating. Yeah. Nobody should be intimidated in attending a political event, a public event. If the police and the organisers, reform, presumably, have been in touch and liaised, as you would always have to do for this sort of thing. How many people do you expect? Have you got adequate car parking, etc., etc.? But if the venue had had warnings of violence, I'm surprised that the police seem to think, oh, well, perhaps they don't mean it.
Well, it's this response to policing that we act when there's a problem, rather than being preventative. And they could have just read online and have known what was going to happen.
Well, yes, I think there will have been people going to that, as there would be to any political party meeting, who might have gone, oh, I'm not going to go through that.
Well, 100 people who'd bought tickets turned around and left.
I'm not a member of your party, Nigel, obviously, but
I expect you to be.
OK. But everybody has got the right to do that, and we're all used to it. And I've been to a gazillion party conferences where they're noisy and, not very pleasant, but not that level of intimidation to members of the public.
This
in a village hall, I presume.
This is well, it was a centre with a gymnasium, swimming pool. There were actually young kids coming in and out.
So it's not. What I mean is, it's not a purpose-built conference centre like you'd get at the Labour or Tory.
No, I mean, my concern here is that if these people are allowed to continue to behave like this, and let's hope the Home Secretary does. I mean, I think Antifa should be a banned organisation, frankly, because of the fact they've used violence so repeatedly, particularly all over America. But otherwise, how do we conduct elections? How do we have proper debate? I think it's quite concerning.
We have, in this country, a serious, and law enforcement have a serious blind spot when it comes to far-left extremism. As you say, Antifa, particularly in the United States, are a violent leftist extremist organisation. The journalist Andy No, who's a very good friend of mine, actually tried to kill him for reporting on their activities. So, this is not something that we can tolerate in the short term without it escalating in the long term. And we've seen this with other types of protests over the last 5 years, that when you give them an inch, it keeps going and going and going until it's the destruction of property, vandalism, and eventually attacking people.
And no arrests. No arrests.
And when you see the way that the police protest other protests, where they're so heavy-handed, and this is straightforward democratic interference. And what's remarkable is that, for all of the talk in Parliament, particularly in the Labour Party, of how it's important for everybody to be nice to one another, and they would be very quick to jump on incitement if it were from a right-wing party towards somebody in the Labour Party. But when an MP like Zara Sultana is putting up posters of you that are really quite sort of demonic-looking, they have nothing to say about that. No. And so, really, if the Labour Party, you mentioned J.D. Vance's speech and him talking about how the greatest threat to us is the loss of our fundamental values in this country, well, diplomatically, in his relationship with Donald Trump, if Keir Starmer doesn't take things like this seriously, freedom of speech, the democratic process, then that is not going to be very good for our relationship with America in the long term.
No,
they are banning books in America, Emma.
What are they banning?
They're banning books in libraries, aren't they? Children's books.
Oh, they're taking some children's books out of public libraries. They're not banning them. They're not burning.
They're banning them from libraries.
They're not burning them or banning them, but I know what you mean.
Yeah.
A spokesman for Devon and Cornwall Police said police were aware of a political event at the Carnbury Leisure Centre in Poole, Cornwall. Officers attended in order to ensure the safety of those present and prevent any potential breach of the peace. Well, sorry. There were reports of minor issues that occurred between protesters and counter-protesters, which were brought under control by officers. No arrests were made. What absolute cobblers. There were no counter-protesters. These were delegates coming to a conference who'd paid money to be there. Dear, oh dear, oh dear. The What the Farage moment of the day is now Winston Churchill portraits are being removed from Parliament buildings. And that over the last couple of years goes along with William Gladstone, Oliver Cromwell, Lord Liverpool, Duke of Wellington, William Wilberforce, Lord Salisbury, John Milton, Charles I, and Queen Victoria and Prince Albert. Do Labour hate our history that much?
26,000 works of art within the parliamentary estate that anybody can choose to have, and many of them ring the changes. I mean, I don't know what your office accommodation is like, but...
Poor.
Okay. Well, maybe we could have a tiny picture. We'll look for a Holbein.
Yeah.
But you could, they are constantly churned round. Under the previous government, there was a review, I think it was 2022, of the sort of works of art that were being displayed in Parliament and public buildings, because a lot of these are areas where the public go as well.
Yeah, Portcullis House particularly.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And Westminster Hall as well. And so there was a review, an audit, I think they called it, of people or symbols, if you like, of slavery or things that we might not be comfortable with anymore.
Wow.
But I think to the idea that, they've taken down Churchill and they've put him in a bunker somewhere, they're just changing things
Well, there
around.
is, I mean, it's sort of Diane Abbott in and Churchill out, really, isn't it? Or am I being unfair?
You're not being unfair. I mean, it's not arbitrary either. The portraits that they've been removing are portraits that were on that list, and many of them were included on that list for, their links to slavery for very tenuous reasons, including, for some reason, William Wilberforce, who spearheaded the abolition of slavery.
Bizarre.
And the thing about Churchill is actually that this is coming from politically motivated, ideologically motivated campaign of defamation against a national hero. One of the main things that often gets brought up against him is the Bengal famine, which has been repeatedly myth-busted and shown to be completely factually false by some of our most eminent historians, including Churchill's biographer Andrew Roberts. So I think what we're seeing with the removal of these portraits is very much in line with what we saw during the campaign.
How funny.
There is a large statue of Churchill.
There is
which
for now.
Keeps getting graffitied
For now.
and attacked.
Well, it's Churchill out in Parliament, but Churchill into the Oval Office. In a moment, let's talk about the National Farmers Union, who held a conference in London today. They are still not getting on very well with the Environment Secretary, Steve Reed.
Hello there, good evening. Welcome to your GB News weather update from the Met Office. A brighter start across eastern areas tomorrow, but feeling chilly with some patchy frost. A different story in the west, turning wet and windy here with some heavy showers following on behind. This is where we see this frontal system slowly moving its way eastwards across the country, but a slight ridge of high pressure before this, which means most showers across England and Wales will ease away overnight. That's away from the far north of Scotland, but plenty of clear skies means temperatures are soon going to dip away, and that leads us to a frosty start tomorrow. But different in the west, clouds spilling in here with some outbreaks of rain, particularly for Northern Ireland, Wales and parts of southwest England. We could actually see some quite heavy downpours by the morning and turning rather blustery around western coasts too. Temperatures largely remaining just above freezing, particularly in the west where we see these cloudier skies, but quite a wet start across parts of Devon and Cornwall, Wales, eventually moving into central parts of England too. Northern Ireland could see some quite heavy showers, and as we see this heavy rain move across northern parts of England, we may even see some snow across high ground in the Pennines, but largely dry and bright across the far north and northeast of Scotland, though we can't rule out a few showers moving into coastal areas. Outbreaks of rain will move their way eastwards erratically through the course of the day, and it turns a little bit brighter behind this, but still plenty of showers. These could be heavy with some hail at times. The driest and brightest of the weather remains to be across the far north and northeast of Scotland. And temperatures will see a slight dip into tomorrow, particularly across Scotland, where highs will only reach around 6 to 7 Celsius, but still above average across parts of the south. Another chilly start on Thursday, likely seeing some patchy frost, but for many a much drier day, plenty of sunshine on offer, though we can't rule out a few showers around coastal areas, particularly once again across the far northwest of the country. And as high pressure begins to build, that means largely dry and bright on Friday and Saturday too. Away from the northwest will eventually turn wet and windy over the weekend. Bye-bye.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
What a full studio here. And it was the National Farmers Union conference today. Well, unsurprisingly, NFU President Tom Bradshaw said what was happening with IHT, etc., was morally wrong and economically flawed. But Steve Reed, the Environment Minister, said the answer many of you want on inheritance tax is not going to be forthcoming. But it was David Passmore that probably made the news today by saying that many of the people caught up in the middle of this include people like my mother, who's 90, still an active farmer. The family have been farming for over 400 years continuously. She's been a widow for over 20 years. She's wishing her life away ahead of April next year. And I've heard that before, actually, myself. I'm joined by Andrew Ward, Lincolnshire farmer. What was the atmosphere like?
Very interesting, Nigel. We all sat and listened. And, of course, we heard everything we want to hear. But then, as Mr. Reed's boss said 2 or 3 years ago, everything he said that we wanted to hear then, nothing's come to fruition. It's all been a bunch of lies. So are we hearing the same thing?
How angry is the farming, genuinely angry is the farming community? Or is it just one of those things in the end you shrug your shoulders? Or does this protest movement continue in your view?
It absolutely continues, and we've got spring coming up now, lambing's going on, we've got spring crops to put in the ground soon, so we are going to have to get those in, because this is the problem we've got. We don't want to have to be in London all the time protesting. We have a business to run, we have a nation to feed. But at the same time, we have to secure the future of our farms and the industry. And so we'll plant those crops, we'll lamb those sheep, and we'll do what we have to do, but then we'll be back, and we'll be back stronger.
I've always thought there's half a chance of some success with this, because there's nearly 100 seats that Labour won in areas they never have contemplated winning before. They're going to lose all these seats unless they make some concessions.
They will, you're quite right, but at the minute they are standing firm. But we are also standing firm, and what they don't seem to realise is that farming is, we are used to dealing with problems. We are used to dealing with the weather, which is a huge issue. The Labour government are only used to dealing with an issue that's come very short term. And we're in this for the long game, and we will keep going.
But you haven't behaved like the French. You know, when the French smallholders protest, you know, they sort of block roads and spread manure everywhere. And it's quite interesting. I mean, the last time there was the big French farmers' protest, all the 8 major roads into Paris were completely blocked. Macron panicked, came back from Brussels with a concession. But you're not going to behave like that, are you?
We haven't done up to now. No, we've been very British. We have been told, get your muck spreaders into Downing Street, show them you mean business. But at the minute, we are playing nicely in playground terms. But we won't play nicely, and we cannot keep doing this. There will be a time when we have to say, now, hang on, enough's enough. And the problem we've got at the minute is the government don't understand agriculture. They don't understand what it costs to put food on the plate. And expecting us to pay this family farm tax, inheritance tax, business property relief, all the extra things that they're expecting us to pay, we just cannot afford to do that. There isn't the money in the industry to do that. And on Tuesday, we've got a rally in London on Pancake Day where we're looking at the value of what it costs to put a 10-inch pancake on a plate. and it's millions and millions of pounds in capital investment to do that.
I mean, Joe, you come from a farming background. Do you sympathise?
Absolutely. I mean, spent the weekend while he was hobnobbing in America. I was getting sheep ready for lambing. You know, it's bloody hard work. And the point you absolutely make is you have got to decide what you're going to plant or when you're going to send the ram in, not waiting on the whims of a politician. You've got to decide years or months in advance. And I think the French and British thing is we need to have a better relationship with food. If we cared about the food on our plates as much as the French did, and we put that into the public domain and the public understood, you know, why have we got an obesity crisis? Because people are eating rubbish. They don't need to. They can eat good quality British food, and that's the campaign that the government ought to be supporting, as well as raising the threshold.
Emma, it was interesting. You know, the point that being made there by Andrew that they've been very British so far, but actually to keep the public on their side, they're going to have to stay that way, aren't they, really?
I mean, I think that the public should be with them all the way, because this is not just about the farmers, this is about the country at large. So I think there would be some people who would be quite happy to see the farmers spreading manure over Parliament Square. But I mean,
oh dear.
I think, as you said, you know, the government fundamentally don't understand farming, and something has got to sort of knock their heads together and make them understand that they need to listen to the farming community, because they're just not getting it.
But it isn't just farming, is it? It's, I mean, you know, shotgun licence renewals are now being made a nightmare, terribly expensive, and trail hunting, which frankly is a very innocent activity, under threat as well. All I can tell you, Andrew, and thank you for coming on, is terrific support from viewers of this programme, and indeed of this channel, for the plight of family farms, and we will keep highlighting your cases.
Well, I'd like to thank you very much for your support, because it is huge, and we really, really do value that, because we're up against it. But we've got just announced today, we've got an extra budget for the arms and for the safety of the UK, haven't we? They've just announced that. But you can't send an army to war on an empty stomach.
No, it's a very fair point.
And if you lose farms, you won't get them back. Cause
no, they'll be full of houses or maybe solar farms.
Oh, stop it.
Jacob's all in favour of solar, of course.
Of course. I am going to be talking about that later, a bit on the green energy and the enormous cost of it, which we've been lied to about. The huge increase in bills that is not to do with gas prices, it's to do with energy policy. The main thing I'm going on is this transformation of Labour on defence. Really interesting. You must listen to GBNews, because last week I said that they should cut the overseas aid budget and give the money to defence. This week they do it. So people should watch here to find out what Labour policy will be next week.
It was in Reform's contract with the people on the 4th of July last year. Exactly what the Prime Minister's announced.
Yes, well, he's got more to do. I think the next thing is he's got to look at the welfare budget, because we have a ridiculously bloated welfare budget that makes us economically unproductive, but also means we don't have the money for defence. So there's much more to do. This is an amazingly encouraging start from the Reverend Starmer.
Well, there you are. Jacob, almost being praiseworthy of the Prime Minister. I think, on that note, I better go and have a pint, really. It's all too much. Coming up next with him, State of the Nation. First, though, let's have a look at the all-important weather, especially for the farmers.
Even though we'll see a cloudy start, it'll be a bright outlook for the rest of the day. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, good evening. Welcome to your GB News weather update from the Met Office. A brighter start across eastern areas tomorrow, but feeling chilly with some patchy frost. A different story in the west, turning wet and windy here with some heavy showers following on behind. This is where we see this frontal system slowly moving its way eastwards across the country, but a slight ridge of high pressure before this, which means most showers across England and Wales will ease away overnight. That's away from the far north of Scotland. But plenty of clear skies means temperatures are soon going to dip away, and that leads us to a frosty start tomorrow. But different in the west, clouds spilling in here with some outbreaks of rain, particularly for Northern Ireland, Wales and parts of southwest England. We could actually see some quite heavy downpours by the morning, and turning rather blustery around western coasts too. Temperatures largely remaining just above freezing, particularly in the west where we see these cloudier skies, but quite a wet start across parts of Devon and Cornwall, Wales, eventually moving into central parts of England too. Northern Ireland could see some quite heavy showers, and as we see this heavy rain move across northern parts of England, we may even see some snow across high ground in the Pennines, but largely dry and bright across the far north and northeast of Scotland, though we can't rule out a few showers moving into coastal areas. Outbreaks of rain will move their way eastwards erratically through the course of the day, and it turns a little bit brighter behind this, but still plenty of showers. These could be heavy with some hail at times. The driest and brightest of the weather remains to be across the far north and northeast of Scotland. And temperatures will see a slight dip into tomorrow, particularly across Scotland, where highs will only reach around 6 to 7 Celsius, but still above average across parts of the south. Another chilly start on Thursday, likely seeing some patchy frost, but for many a much drier day, plenty of sunshine on offer, though we can't rule out a few showers around coastal areas, particularly once again across the far northwest of the country. And as high pressure begins to build, that means largely dry and bright on Friday and Saturday too, away from the northwest, will eventually turn wet and windy over the weekend. Bye-bye.
We'll see a cold snap, which will quickly develop into a warm front. Boxed Boiler Repairs, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Don't miss your chance to be one